John, you'll be there tonight, and a lot of things to discuss. I know, when you get to that first game, you've talked about so many things leading up to that first game, but a couple areas. We have the poll question out there at Mike Gill Show on Twitter. We asked the listeners out there, what are they looking forward to see the most tonight? And one of them that I put is the first team offense. And just kind of, give us your take on how much of them you anticipate seeing tonight. I know that Peterson indicated that Bradford might not play a whole heck of a lot, but does that mean the rest of the guys would join him with a quick hook?
I think it's going to be a pretty quick hook, maybe a couple series for the really entrenched veterans, and then some of the other guys who are borderline, who haven't really developed as much, like Nelson Aguilar at receiver, Josh Huff at receiver. Maybe they'll get a little more time. But it's the first preseason game, and you have to be very, very careful. You've already seen this team comes in banged up to begin with a lot of starters not even going to be there. So you have to be careful, and I think Doug understands that. This isn't very important, and that's just the reality of preseason football in the NFL.
Who are some guys that are on perception-wise on the first team that maybe need more than just a couple series?
Well, like I said, it starts at the wide receiver position with Aguilar mainly. And there are certain things you want to look at because they want him to be the second receiver on this team behind Jordan Matthews. And so I want to see if he can get all press coverage because that's been an issue for him. And it continues to be throughout practice and throughout camp. So that's something you want to keep an eye on. Obviously, Ryan Matthews, I can't imagine he would play all that much just because of the nature of him coming off the ankle injury to begin with in his history. So even though he might need a little work just to get in the feel for it, I can't imagine they would use him all that much. And defensively, they have to be very, very wary for the simple reason there's not a lot of depth up and down that lineup, including on the front four, which is supposed to be the strength of this team. There's 5 very good players, but after that it drops off dramatically, so you don't want to put those guys too much at risk. So I don't think you're going to see a lot of familiar names all that long tonight. So get your snack, get your beverage, sit in if you want to see those guys because they're going to be out quickly.
Well, Ed, but here's the interesting part. Like typically in a preseason game, once the first team goes out, yeah, you might want to see the second guys if there's some guys battling. But that second half has the intrigue because that's when Wentz will be out there on the field. So there is some legitimate intrigue in all 4 quarters until maybe the end of the fourth quarter, that second half of the fourth quarter when McLeod Bethel-Thompson gets some snaps potentially.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting because you're right. It's sort of flipping the script. Normally preseason games are easy for writers because we get to write about the starters and we're all done, so we don't have to worry about any deadline. But in this case, it's completely different because the story is Carson Wentz. So from the Eagles' perspective, it's going to be interesting to see if they want to have a few snaps with the better receivers, with the Chris Givens, with the Nelson Aguilar, with the Josh Huff, just to see him play with those guys instead of all the rookies and undrafted free agents. So you might want to take a look at that. And then defensively, we mentioned earlier in the week, Mike, Jalen Mills, it's going to be interesting. He might be in there early with first teamers just to see how he measures up if the Eagles want to see him in that type of situation.
Yeah, Jim Schwartz indicated that he wanted to see him match up against those type of receivers. Read into it what you want, he said, but you're anticipating then seeing Mills out there. Let me ask you this. Rowe has been a big guy, a topic of conversation. He seems like the kind of the guy, he's the backup quarterback. Everybody wants to see him out there. Do the Eagles want to see more of him? Do they want to give him a chance to win this job? Like, is he the guy that they hope surprises them?
I don't know. That's a good question because they were down on him. There's no question. Jim Schwartz and Doug Peterson, he was in the doghouse after the all-season work, and it's pretty evident he's not a shirts and shorts guy. He's not going to stand out in that type of environment because he's a bigger cornerback. He's very, very physical. Dion Long, for instance, we talked about him yesterday for getting in trouble in Los Angeles, but when he got here, during one-on-one drills and press coverage, Eric Rowe just stoned him at the line of scrimmage and wouldn't let him get off. So that's the kind of thing he's impressive with, and the fact that he's very, very physical, and he's a better football player when the pads are on. And obviously, you got to play with the pads on. So I think at some point, if he continues to impress, they're going to have to let him out of the doghouse because they're just not that talented at cornerback where they can just ignore a potential starter. And I think if you look at this team long-term at the cornerback position, Leotis McKelvin is rock solid right now, but he's 31 years old. The future could be Eric Rowe and Jalen Mills. So they're going to have to open their mind and realize maybe he's not a practice player, but he does better with the pads on. So if that continues, I think Eric will continue to trend in the right direction again.
John McMullen's with us. We're talking Eagles football as the Eagles play their first preseason game tonight against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You can hear that game right here on 97.3 ESPN FM. And, John, you mentioned Ron Brooks. He's the favorite to win a starting spot, but how about who's the nickel favorite in your mind?
Well, I think he's the nickelback, and that's where he's going to be. The only question is he going to start on the outside with Leotis McKelvin and then move inside to the slot when the Eagles go to the nickel? So he's going to be the nickel corner. It's just a matter of does Nolan Carroll or Jalen Mills or Eric Rowe overtake him for that other outside slot, and he would just be strictly the nickelback. Right now, he's in the conversation to be the starter opposite Leotis McKelvin. And as I said, then when the Eagles go in the nickel, he would be the one sliding inside.
Now and
that's a better position for him, Pete.
You've talked a lot about Jalen Mills. How about the other Jalen that's on the roster, Jalen Watkins? Because that's a guy that I think would be certainly really getting a long look tonight. Is that correct?
Yes, you will, and that's interesting because I don't think the Eagles are very comfortable at all with their depth behind Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod. And when Malcolm went down with his hamstring injury, he's not going to play tonight. Ed Reynolds was the first one who got an opportunity to run with the first team, and then it was Jalen Watkins. So they want to look at both of those guys, and right now on the depth chart, Jalen has sort of overtaken Ed Reynolds. So he's the one who's going to get the first chance to be that third safety. But that's another position where if they're not impressed, come the waiver wire, and when you get down to the 53, that's another position they can look outside the organization.
Hey, I want to get your take on Nigel Bradham as a guy who knows Jim Schwartz's knows his system. I'm wondering, we haven't heard a lot about him other than his little mix-up down in Miami, but you would think because he knows the system that he might stand out a little bit in terms of, being a little bit ahead of guys, but it doesn't sound like he has had a overly outstanding camp.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the position he plays and the fact that he's a strong side linebacker. And generally in the 4-3, the Sam linebacker is going to be the one that comes out in the nickel, and that's the case with the Eagles. So in today's era of football, you're in the nickel anywhere from 60, could be up to 70% of the time, depending on who you're playing. So the strong side linebacker isn't going to play that much. So that's part of it. And the other part is it's not designed to be a splash position. In other words, every defense is designed to funnel things to certain playmakers. And Jim Schwartz, it's the middle linebacker, the weak side linebacker, not the Sam linebacker. And then finally, Nigel's pretty good at it. So even though it's a limited role, he's solid in what he's asked to do, and he's not flashy, so he's not going to create waves either way. You're not going to notice him because he's not going to make a ton of mistakes, and he's not going to make a lot of splash plays, as I said, because his position is not designed to do that.
The preseason, John, of course, position battles are some of the things you watch in games like this. Preseason game number 1 tonight, and I've read in a couple different places the name Destiny Vallejo. I mean, what can you tell me about this guy? Does he really have a shot to make the team?
Yeah, I think he does. The Eagles are going to go very deep on the defensive line just because how Jim likes to rotate and keep guys fresh for the fourth quarter. And Destiny's one of those guys Doug Peterson specifically mentioned as one of the young players that stood out in camp. So he sort of distanced himself from the other undrafted free agents, and now he's in a battle with Mike Martin and Taylor Hart for a backup defensive tackle position. And remember, Mike Martin is out with a knee injury, and the Eagles don't have to report the severity of these injuries, but he's coming off an ACL. So we don't know how significant that is. And if it is significant, well, then he has a really good chance to make the team.
Yeah, and, one spot that the Eagles are pretty strong in, you think, is across the defensive line, maybe that front seven in the starters, but depth, of course, at the linebacker position to be questioned. Fletcher Cox and Benny Logan, the 2 tackles. Interesting with the D-line rotations tonight, John. Is that something that we should take a lot of notice of, or should we not read a lot into tonight's rotations?
Well, I think you should read into the fact that the guys who are going to be out there first. Now, obviously, as I said, Mike Martin's not going to play, so you're going to see a lot of Taylor Hart. He'll probably play both the under tackle and the nose tackle. You'll see Destiny a lot. The key is how do they treat Brandon Graham? Because if you see the depth chart, which is unofficial, and it's put together by the PR department, not the coaching staff, but they listed Brandon as a co-starter at both defensive end slots. So if they treat him like the other starters, I think he is going to be a co-starter. But if he's in there with the second team exclusively, well, then I think it says a lot of what the Eagles think of him and how things are going. Now, I don't think that's going to happen because the last few days of practice, Brandon has been getting a lot of first-team work at left defensive end. So I think the Eagles are still trying to work out who's going to be the base end in their system.
John, Mike wrote a piece on the website on 973ESPN.com about Trey Burton. People certainly talking about him. Does he get extended time tonight, maybe to prove to the coaches that they need to find a way to get him on the field and in the game plan more this season?
Yeah, I think he gets a fair amount of time. Mainly, there's certain positions, tight end being one of them, you don't have a ton of guys, so somebody's got to play. And unfortunately, it's probably going to fall on the shoulders of Trey, who has been one of the most impressive players in camp to this point. I think the Eagles, when it's all said and done, they're going to use a heck of a lot of 12 personnel, which is 1 running back and 2 tight ends, mainly because it's their deepest position, and they're just better football players than their wide receivers. So, to me, you want to have Selleck and Ertz on the field together a lot. And if they're on the field together a lot, you got to give them a breather at times, and that's going to be Trey Burton's role. And he's proven he's a very, very versatile guy, and he can create matchup problems for opposing defenses. And the Eagles don't have a lot of players you can say that about. So I think it's important that he plays well. And if he does play well, I think he's going to force the Eagles to get him on the field more than they have been in the past.
Yeah, I'm reading in the article that I wrote, I found a lot of interesting quotes from the coaching staff, like Frank Reich, who said, he said, Trey's like a wide receiver out there. You got to get him out there. He's got the speed. He's got natural instincts, moves for a tight end. Then he continued to say he's really stood out. He's made so many big plays out there. Then he, was followed up by talking about how he creates such matchup problems between Ertz and Selleck and Burton. The three of them do so many different things. And then Reich at the end of the article, that I found, he says, I love Trey Burton. He's a football player now. The guy understands the game. He's athletic. It doesn't seem like they're shying away from saying that, hey, we like this guy, and we're going to do what we can to figure out ways to get him on the field. John, I just don't know how realistic it is to get three tight ends involved in one game plan.
Well, I think it's more realistic because of the dearth they have at the receiver position. So you're right. I mean, if they had really, really good receivers, you can't justify it. But that's not where they are currently. And I don't know if you look at a Chris Gibbons, for instance, you look at a Josh Huff, Nelson Aguilar, any of those three names, hey, right now, to me, Trey Burton's a better football player. He plays a different position, obviously, but there's something to the fact that he is a matchup problem. The Eagles have lined him up outside the numbers, and he's been able to create these mismatches because the natural default setting for a defensive coordinator when he sees a tight end go out wide is to put a linebacker or a safety out there. And if you do that with Trey Burton, he's going to beat him. And in truth, he's beat some of the Eagles' cornerbacks outside the numbers. So he's a really athletic guy. He's not a typical tight end. He's very undersized. So he's more of a hybrid wide receiver tight end. And he's just a better player than what the Eagles have at the wide receiver position.
John, how about in the kicking game and the long snapping positions? Those are two position battles. Is there a legitimate shot that John Dornbos, for example, loses his job?
Well, I thought there was because he was a little shaky last season, a little atypical for him because he's been rock solid. He's getting older, but he's been solid in camp. And then you have the off-the-field stuff. The America's Got Talent. He's such a big part of this organization and the community. I think it's sort of like a championship boxing fight. If the kid, John De Palma, if he's going to beat him out, he's got to knock him out. And I don't think that's taken place to this point. It's been such a wide division before him. And truth be told, Dornbos has been better, but, that's a position long snapper that if you bring in competition, the actual games are going to decide it because there's not much going on in practice where you can really, really evaluate a long snapper.
No, I guess it's just a feel. Which guy you feel more comfortable with?
And then on the kicking, Sturgis and Cody Parkey.
Yeah, Sturgis has been much better in practice, significantly better. And they've even started, they kind of deferred to Cody Parkey at first and would always give him the first rotation. But that's changed. And now Caleb Sturgis is taking the first kick in every practice. And I expect that to continue tonight. And if he has a solid preseason, he's won the job. He's been the better kicker.
We're talking with John McMullen. He'll have a front row seat tonight at Lincoln Financial Field. And, of course, the Eagles and the Bucs. You can listen to the game right here on 97.3 ESPN. Well, it's like we take for granted sometimes, Sam, but, he is the starter. He will play a little bit tonight. But give us your overview of where Sam looks today as opposed to this time last year when he could not even participate in this game.
Well, he's way ahead of where he was last year as far as health goes, and that's a big positive for him, and he's talked about that. This is the first off season he's been able to work out in a number of years. So from that standpoint, he's way ahead. But Sam is Sam to this point. He's very good in 7-on-7 drills. He's very accurate, and he's not the same player quite when things go live. And I don't think that's changing. In fact, Mike Sando did every year he talks to a bunch of coaches and front office people for ESPN and rates the quarterbacks. And Sam came in at number 28 this year. So that tells you where he is as far as what the league thinks. And a lot of it, I thought one of the scouts made a very depth assessment of where he is. And that's the fact in today's NFL, you really have to extend plays. And Sam can't do that. You're not going to stay clean in the pocket in this league because all defensive coordinators kind of know and kind of understand. If you don't get a pass rush, you're going to get beat. And if you need the blitz, you need the blitz. You need to do whatever you want to do. And people who are playing Sam Bradford know if he is forced to get out of the pocket, forced to extend plays, he's not going to hurt you. So everyone knows that. I think that's the biggest issue with Sam Bradford.
Mike and I want to know, are you making a left or a right? Because we think we heard your blinker there. So
yeah, I am on my way to Lincoln Financial Field.
These are the deep questions that I have to offer. Left or right?
And right now,
we're just changing lanes.
I'm about to drive into the parking lot. So
how is that parking lot? How is the parking lot? Anybody out there throwing down a couple Shastas?
No, and the reason why I'm leaving now is because my entire life is based on beating traffic now. So I like to get here early.
Yeah.
Well, I've seen some of the guys beat you to the stadium already. I've seen some already, the obligatory open empty stadium, calm before the storm pictures being posted on Twitter. But there's no tailgates happening. Nobody out there already.
No, it's kind of dead at this point. But it's preseason week 1. So.
You're going in the D
and then there's
right?
also some kind of there's some kind of weird. They're building some kind of weird thing in the Wells Fargo.
No,
so
that's left over from Hillary. They're taking it down.
Oh, that's still left over.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a long time.
Blame Hillary.
So they still don't have that parking lot open.
The slower they work, the more they get paid.
Oh wow, that lot's not open for tonight?
No.
Oh wow.
It is a mess. That lot is a mess.
Ooh.
I've seen it. I saw it from 95 when I went up over the
weekend. Bad. That was 2 weeks ago, wasn't it?
We hope you get in there safely, John. I know that's a challenge. Yes.
John will have more news and notes on tonight's game at 973ESPN.com. He'll be back tomorrow to recap everything from tonight as the Eagles open the preseason against the Buccaneers. John, enjoy the game tonight, pal.
Take care, bud.
Hey, thank you, guys.